Worried about work, family, or other relationships? I'm Chuck Wolf, a pioneer in emotional intelligence. When live on the Emotion Roadmap, I use a proven 4-question framework to turn emotional roadblocks into clear next steps on air in real time. Join us Tuesdays at 5 p.m., twice a month on YouTube. Subscribe, go to YouTube, type in @CJWOLFE5, and ask to be notified when I'm live so you don't miss a show. Call in when you see the number on screen. In 1990, the psychologists who sparked the science of emotions asked me to help translate their research into everyday tools. I built the Emotion Roadmap, a simple 4-question model that helps anyone improve how they manage their feelings and influence others ethically and effectively. On the Emotion Roadmap, take the wheel and control how you feel. We turn worry into clarity and stress into strategy. Each 45-minute episode blends practical psychology, common sense tools, guest experts, and live caller coaching. Smart, capable people often get stuck when emotions run high, and this show helps you get unstuck fast. When you call, you help everyone else who listens. As I help you, I explain how the Emotion Roadmap works so that everyone listening is learning to use the process. To learn more about me, go to www.emotionroadmap.com. I have been very lucky in life and have worked with and learned from some of the greatest thinkers in the world at Harvard and Yale, other places, and I want to bring what I have learned to hopefully make a meaningful, positive difference in your lives. Enjoy and tell your friends and your family.
And we're live. This is Chuck Wolf, and you're listening to the Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. And I'm live streaming here in Simsbury Media, and I have a guest today that I'm very excited to talk with. It's a guest that I've been working with since March of 2022, so it's been a while. And my guest is Tamara Draga, who is, I got to say, she's an award-winning business leader. She's won some special titles in organizations outside of where she works, some of the groups that support her type of business, as well as some of the organizations in the community where she's active and as a volunteer. And she has just been someone very special to me as we've gotten to know each other and work closely together. And she has a company that I'm going to ask her to talk about, which is a very traditional kind of company. It's a logistics company that deals in warehousing and trucking. And she's going to tell you more about her company. And I want to say that I've been working with her to introduce her to something called the Emotion Roadmap. Those of you who have watched this show know that the Emotion Roadmap is a tool that I've created to help people to understand how to be better at managing their own emotions and how to influence the emotions of others. And I've used it in various ways with all kinds of different organizations, particularly in the business industry and with all kinds of Fortune 500 companies, mid-sized companies, small companies, as well as with organizations like the military and government and so forth, and schools. So I've used it a lot, and what it basically does is it helps people look at the idea of there's a new science of emotional intelligence, and it's based on this idea that we have emotional abilities. And based on those abilities, I created a series of questions to help people benefit from the new science that basically works like this. For any critical situation you're facing, any circumstance where you have a major decision or you're worried about a conversation that you're worrying about, it might escalate, any time that you have strong emotions in play, lots of times I find smart people get stuck. And one of the things that I've helped with along many years since the 1990s now is this idea of saying, how are you feeling about what's going on? And if anybody else is key, how is he or she or they feeling? And what would be ideal to feel? And what would be ideal not only for you, but for anybody that might be key to what you're trying to get done? And how do you get there? How do you get from what you might be feeling? Let's say, for instance, that an organization is about to announce a change and everybody in the organization is feeling very anxious and concerned and fearful. And you're the leader of that organization and you want them to feel somewhat secure and comfortable and trusting that whatever's going to come is going to be good for the organization and good for them as well. How do you make that happen? How do you change feelings? How do you get feelings to change? Well, I've been working with this for a long time, and I got introduced to Tamara by a person who was a person that met me through LinkedIn. And as many people know, LinkedIn is a place where a lot of people do business, meet people, find connections, network. And this person said, "I've got a company. I think that you might benefit them because of what you do, Chuck." And she said, "I'd like you to meet two people that I think you'll like, and I think you might be able to help because they're in a situation where they are in a family-owned business. It's a brother and sister, and they have some tough decisions to make ahead of them. And I think what you do with emotional intelligence might be helpful." So I had the chance to meet Tamara and her brother James, and that's when we started. And I was asking Tamara when we first to talk a little bit about herself initially, but also to tell you what Tamara's experience in the last several years that is worth listening to and why you might want to stay and listen to the podcast. We'll take deeper dives into all the things that we're going to talk about in the very next few minutes. But I do want you to know what's been special about the work we've done together. And it's been very special. And we've developed a really nice relationship to the point where I just really enjoy talking to Tamara, even if we're not talking about business. So, Tamara, I'm going to turn it over to you and ask you to say a little bit about yourself and then tell us some of the highlights for the experiences having to deal with emotional intelligence over the last several years for yourself, for your family, I guess, as well as for your all of the business colleagues that you have at the workplace.
Sure. Thank you. First of all, I completely agree with your assessment of how things have progressed with our relationship. I look at myself as a completely different person today than where I was, back in March of 22. Obviously, lots of change within my own companies, change within my family. I have 3 children. They've grown. My husband and his career, and so I really hold dear the pieces of information that I've learned from you throughout our years working together. And I think the big takeaway is that emotional intelligence, specifically how you lay it out in the emotion roadmap, I think that's something that's often overlooked when you're talking about high-level leaders in companies. And I think maybe my background before I came into the family business, I am an elementary special ed teacher by education. So I think there was already a piece of that desire to learn about people, help people grow, learn and change. And so I believe that was a piece that was already in, me as an individual core value before we even started working together. So I think that might be part of why I really kind of fell in love with learning more about emotional intelligence and learning how to use the emotion roadmap in business and with my family.
So one of the things I think that happened, Tamara, when I first heard that, because actually I think we talked about this too. My initial background was as a school counselor, and I work with young kids with special needs. So I think we both came at this from the standpoint of how do we help other people to grow? How do we help people develop, and especially people that are challenged sometimes? And so, and some of the work that I did initially was with some mental challenges, but also with some emotional challenges with a lot of the kids that I was working with. But I think when I met you, I found that you wanted to apply that in the workplace. I think you said that you felt like, I guess, there was a piece of you that loved what your family had done, what your dad and his cousin, I guess, that's what you watched growing up, that he had done with his business. And why don't you tell us a little bit about the business part of it? Because I know that you've taken what you've learned and really done a great job applying it. And I know also that when your brother was here, you and he split some things up. And what I remember was James was really good at certain aspects of the business, particularly on the financial pieces. And he handled some of the tough situations that you face sometimes with people's sometimes lack of accountability. And you wanted to figure out how to do that too, but do it differently. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, my businesses are in the logistics field, a public warehouse, a transportation company, and freight brokerage. Our business has been around, we're in our 69th year. My grandfather started the business back in the 50s. His brother joined him. Then each had sold to a son. So that's my dad and cousin, who I worked with for about 10 years. My brother he worked with them for about 7 years before he and I purchased the businesses from them. And so as a family-owned business, obviously lots of change through generational transitions, and then continuing to learn about how people operate and how you manage change. That was something that I felt was important as my brother and I moved into leadership positions and then ownership positions. And so, I watched my grandpa and great uncle, as well as my dad and cousin, and how they worked with people, how they treated people. Obviously, they all had different approaches to things. And so being able to watch how certain approaches worked and how certain approaches maybe had a little bit of difficulty resonating with people, again, that's what I really was excited to learn more about is, how do I connect with my staff in an authentic way? Because if it's not real and authentic, you're going to come off as, fake and disingenuous, and that's not going to be helpful as you're trying to either use the emotion roadmap tool or even just teaching your teams about emotional intelligence or learning about the emotional intelligence levels within your team. I know that sometimes talking about feelings and emotions, especially when you think about doing that at work, people get a little squirmy about. They think, oh, this is work. We don't need to talk about how we feel. And maybe even especially in a more rough and tumble industry like trucking and warehousing, people might even raise an eyebrow about that. And for sure, there were people on my team that kind of went, what? You want us to talk about what? Right. But I do, and I know we'll probably get into that a little bit later, but that was definitely something that I did feel was important. Like I said, after spending one-on-one time with you, learning about the emotion roadmap tool and how I could use it for myself within conversations, either with my family members in the business, with staff members that I was working with customers. I mean, I even taught this to my children and my husband. So it was definitely something that resonated with me as a very helpful tool to use in daily life, right? We're all having conversations with people. Oftentimes, if the communication goes a little bit sideways, you can get into a situation where you're managing your own emotions, in real time, and sometimes also having to manage the emotions of others in real time.
So it was great getting to know you and James and working with you and finding a way to find an amicable agreement, because I thought James was really good at what he did, but I don't think he was happy with being in the business. He had dreams of doing other things that he was excited about when he left and went off on to do his own entrepreneurial kind of work in the swimming industry of all places. But it was very different, right? And so, but we found a way to work together. And I know initially when we first spoke, it was I guess. What was your first reaction when we first started the talk? Because again, talking about emotions at the workplace is like, why would anybody do that? It doesn't seem to make sense. Everybody wants a logical, rational workplace, and now you're bringing in how we feel, really. And then I thought one of the leaders. Well, two things about the two leaders that you have that are your key leaders. One is Gentry loved the idea when we introduced the idea of a model, of a strategic model, and we'll talk a little bit more about that had to do with a lot of companies, a lot of big companies particularly, have a model that's based around shared values. And we introduced to Gentry and to you a model that I kind of grew up with in Harvard Business School called the 7S model of management that had shared values at its center, and around it 6 other S's. It was 7S model. So shared values was at the heart. And then there was strategy, structure, systems, style, skills, and staff. And it's a way of talking about every aspect of an organization can fit under one of those S's. And he kind of ran with that. And he's since become your key leader in strategy, I know. And also we use some of the way of thinking from that model to think about how we want people to feel. by looking at, is it a personality issue sometimes when a conflict arose, or is it a system issue or a strategy issue or a structure issue? And he really ran with that. And then Nick was great when he said, I'll tell you how I want people to feel. I want them to feel accountable. And I thought, I've never heard anybody say that. And I thought, I'm going to use that going forward, because what a great word, accountable. Because I think when people are accountable, when you know the person beside you that's going to get something on your desk on Friday at noontime is going to have it on your desk Friday at noontime in the way it's supposed to be done, and you can count on that. Or if it's not going to happen, you're going to know very soon, and you're going to work together to make it right. I think that creates a sense of joy in the workplace. And one of the things later on, I remember we had this nice experience where in your groups that came to work with me, I think it was 7 sessions, about an hour each, where we came in and we were trying to teach them how to use the emotion roadmap. And we asked them every week, how have you used it? What did you do? Did you have a customer, a vendor incident, something in the community that you work with that you can talk about? And did you think about how you wanted people to feel, and did it work? And they all came in and talked about what they learned. I remember Nick saying, one of the things I want to have people feel at work is fun. And then, I've watched in social media over the last, 6, 7 months, maybe longer. It looks like the posts that are coming from you and from Gentry and others in your organization, it just seems like your group is having a ball working together. And everybody seems, I started to think about it as a culture of joyful accountability.
So I love that term. I think you and I had a conversation about accountability early on after Nick brought that up in one of our meetings, and just a conversation around, does accountability have a positive or negative kind of underlying connotation to it? And I think oftentimes, somebody hears, oh, I want to hold you accountable for this, and they think of something negative, or they think it's going to be a bad conversation. And I had a lot of conversations with my team about how accountability is really caring, right? If I am holding somebody accountable for things they say they're going to do, or tasks that I know that they can get done, that's me showing, how much I care for them, because I have that desire for them to succeed. I have them, I want them to do well in the things that they set out to do. And if I can hold them accountable to do that, that's going to make that happen, either in a timely fashion, or, make that easier because I'm helping with their accountability piece. So we kind of coined that phrase internally as accountability really is caring, and some people really like that, and some people did not really care for that. And I think it really did help. It helped in certain terms with a little bit of self-selection, I guess, because that culture of accountability, or joyful accountability, I like that phrase, is really something that we've been working hard on, specifically the last 3 years, but really since we started doing work with you around emotional intelligence and the emotion roadmap. That's a big piece of where I spend a lot of my time and what we're trying to develop internally.
One of the things that strikes me, and we talked a little bit about this prior to this interview, just because we wanted to just make sure that we had a clear focus. And I had asked you a little bit about retention, because in a lot of organizations today, it's kind of hard to retain people, particularly young workers. At the slightest sign of, somebody doesn't like something they did, it's like, okay, I'm out of here. People just don't want to stay in places these days. But I think one of the things that happens is when Gallup, one of the organization that studies engagement, Gallup is known for going around the world really to actually assess the levels of engagement all over the place. And they find consistently that most organizations don't have highly engaged employees to a large degree. They have employees engaged, sometimes highly engaged, doing everything they can for the organization at like a high level is maybe 20%. And then maybe 20% that are actually really upset with their organizations and actively disengaged, and maybe even trying to sabotage, or at least do as little as they possibly can for the organization. And then everybody's kind of in the middle. And I think, as I think about engagement, I think about it from the standpoint of what causes people to feel engaged, because I think of engagement as an emotion. And so when people say leave emotions at the door, don't bring them into the workplace, it's kind of crazy talk, because when people are fully engaged, you get better productivity, you get better profitability, you get better retention, better loyalty, and people want to help you succeed, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to succeed. I remember Dylan, I think, said one of the things that I'm much more thoughtful about these days, since I'm focused on how people feel, is when I have to ask somebody to work overtime or work on the weekends. I'm really sensitive to what's going on in their lives, and not just, hey, I told you, you got to do it. It's a different approach. It feels supportive, and it feels like not only do you, Tamara, I know you came with this, you brought it with you to the workplace, but not everybody does. And not everybody thinks it's important to show support to one another in a workplace. And I thought so many more people were saying how much more supported they felt and how much more supported they were trying to be as we did the work together.
I agree. I mean, that was one of the goals when we set out to start having these meetings or these educational sessions with the groups of my management level and key employees within the different companies. That was definitely a goal, is to just make people more aware. And I 100% agree with the statement about it's crazy when people say leave the emotions at the door. There's certain emotions. You and I have had this conversation, often together, and then with my teams, which emotions are helpful and, which emotions might not be helpful for that moment. And really trying to understand, as a person, how that affects me as I'm walking into a room. But then also understanding that every other human individual is walking into that room also carrying different emotions with them. And that's going to affect how they show up, in conversation, in work. You talk about productivity and engagement. All of those things factor into that.
In the coaching that I do, even at the very senior executive levels in very big companies, some of the work that I end up doing, because my background includes family therapy, I mean, I don't do therapy in coaching, but some of the work that I do, I feel is therapeutic, and I know it has been for different people. And one of the things that strikes me is that sometimes when you are at work, and it's to your point that you were making a moment ago, people are walking in the door and they're carrying all kinds of baggage with them. They're not just coming in the door and saying, oh, okay, I'm at work now, and not thinking about what's going on at home, especially when there's trouble at home. And I remember distinctly that and you were fine with this, and I think most people are, but not everybody is initially, which is, I think of what this emotion roadmap is as a life skill. It's really helpful to people both at their workplace and in their home as well. And I think you've mentioned a few times that you've used it, you've taught it to your kids. I remember you brought your dad to meet me, because he was like, really, you have this guy, what is this guy doing? And he walked away feeling pretty good about our conversation too, I think. So it's sort of, yep. So it's one of those things where I think family matters too. Of course, in this case, your father was still in business with you, but also I think just the idea of, can I use the emotion roadmap, which is simply a way of asking myself, how are the people around me feeling? And is it in the way, or is it helpful for what we're all trying to get done together, or what I'm trying to get done? And if I'm trying to influence people to do the right thing, am I able to influence them in a positive way by paying attention to how they feel, or am I just trying to force it? And I think when you're so much more thoughtful about how you want someone to feel, and you've learned how to plan for that, I call it emotion-based planning. That's one of the things I try to teach, is that a lot of times, again, when people are stuck, I've been on the radio for a long time, not the YouTube, but I've been on a radio station, a community radio station, for 17 years now. And when people call in, it's a lot of smart people listen to that station, and they call in and they're stuck, and it's almost always because something emotional is in play. And I find that when you stop and ask yourself, well, what am I feeling? And what would I want to feel based on what I'm trying to have happen here? And now I start thinking about that, and I come up with what I think would be ideal to feel. All of a sudden, options start showing up that people who are stuck are no longer stuck anymore. And people who call in feeling somewhat helpless around certain issues now feel hopeful by the end of a 15, 20-minute conversation. And so I think that's kind of what the experience was for the people as I started to go through groups. I think I had asked you before about, when did you start to feel like this was taking hold beyond just you and your initial senior leaders?
So we did that group of 7 sessions. We split my management team and key employees up into 2 different groups. And I as I was thinking about this the other day, I think when it really kind of struck me, I don't know that there was like this one big moment of, oh my gosh, it's here and they all get it and here we go.
Mm-hmm.
But when I started hearing them talking about it outside of those meetings, and not necessarily that they were collaborating, or talking about some of the things we were asking them to think about between sessions, but even as they were joking about things and making, like, oh, hey, this would be great to bring up, in the session with Chuck, or, joking about it in different ways. That's when it's like, all right, well, they understand it enough that it's now part of language that has been woven into everyday conversations. That's when it's just kind of subconscious. You start doing these things and your mind starts going through those motions and thinking about those things without having to force it to think that way. In the beginning of those sessions, it was kind of forcing our minds to think a certain way. We did the exercise where we asked everybody to check in 3 times a day with themselves, right? In the morning. I don't know if that's something you've spoken about on this show. But we would have them check in the morning, check in midday, and check in the evening. And at first, you could tell it was very much homework for them to have to do that. But as we got towards the end of those sessions, I even had people come to me and say, I don't have to set an alarm anymore. I don't have to write it down anymore. Now it's become that habit where I think about it. Even since those sessions the group have ended, quite some time ago, I still have people that will make comments to me about that particular exercise and how they continue to do it. Maybe if it's not 3 times a day, they're checking in, morning and evening.
So let me
that's
say
something that resonated.
Let me say a little more about that, because I have talked about it a little bit, but of course, different people listen at different times. So let me just say what you're talking about is one of the ways I ask people to pay more attention to how they're feeling is by checking in those 3 times, as you mentioned. Because what I found is that most of us, and by the way, anybody who's listening can try this for themselves, but if you do this for a week or two, you'll find that you really learn something about how feelings are impacting your life. And here's what I mean. If you ask yourself to set an alarm for 3 times a day for the next 7 to 14 days, and I see most of us have smartphones, so you can do that. And the alarm goes off, say, around 10:15, which is mid-morning for most people. And ask yourself, how am I feeling? Is it how I want to feel? Because for most people, including myself, I find that sometimes I'll have a list of things I want to do in the beginning of the day. And as the day starts, I get sometimes distracted and I'll go down a rabbit hole or somebody will call me and it's an interesting call, or somebody I haven't talked to in a while. And I land up, all of a sudden I realize, hey, I'm pretty far behind with what I want to get done today. So at 10:15, I can check in with myself and say, hey, if I'm not feeling how I want to feel, how do I get back to how I want to feel? And what can I do to make that right? So I've got another hour and a half maybe before lunch. And then the same thing mid-afternoon, say 2:30, 3 o'clock, depending on what mid-afternoon means to you. But at that point, you've only got a few hours left of what most people's typical workday looks like. Ask yourself the same question. How are you feeling? And if you somehow got off track, how do you want to feel? And what will bring you back? And what caused you to be off track? And then finally, the last one that you mentioned was the one at home, which is around 6:30, 7:30 at night, depending on when you get home and how much time is elapsed between when you're in the office and when you're in your home space. And then at 7:30, say, ask yourself, how am I feeling? Do I feel really present? Or am I still, even though I'm physically here, still got my head at work? And I'm not really present. I'm not present for my family. If I've got kids, I'm not present for my kids. Or even if I just said I'm going to spend some personal time doing some personal things, I'm not doing that. I'm still trying to figure out what went wrong or what I need to do different today or tomorrow at work. So it's a fascinating way to learn about yourself. And I think what you just said, it really resonates with me that people got value from that, because it's a nice way to learn about how our emotions actually impacting us. Because I like to think, when I think about emotions, it's like most of the time, most people don't really think about how they're feeling unless it's really intense. obviously you're having an out-of-body experience. A fellow named Dan Goleman, very prolific writer in this field, talked about an amygdala hijack, a part of your brain that just seems like it takes over, and your rational self no longer seems to exist for a few moments. So that's when we know what we're feeling. But also when we're really joyous, something really incredibly special has happened. We just got a wonderful promotion, or we got the house that we wanted, the job we wanted, or we got into the college that we thought we wanted to go to. Something special's happened. And then one of the things that happens is that one of the things I want to make people understand that happens is that we're always feeling something. It's kind of like breathing, because you don't really think about breathing unless you just run up a flight of stairs or just ran a race and you're really huffing and puffing, and that's when you're focused on your breathing. But if I ask people, do you notice when you're breathing? Not really. Do you notice what you're feeling? Most of the time, not really. But by doing this exercise, you pay much more attention, because we're always feeling something, and how we feel impacts how we think and how we behave. I like to make the point with people when I'm doing, sometimes I'm speaking to a large group of people, and I'll make the point about how many people think of themselves as very rational people, and the people that they know as very rational. Okay, and how many of you have seen some of those same people, maybe yourself, raise your hand if you've been looking at your phone when you're driving? And almost everybody sheepishly raises their hand, because they either know somebody who's done it or they've done it themselves. There's nothing that's rational about that. We're not necessarily rational beings. So we have the, FOMO, fear of missing out, I guess. But we have this impulsivity that really causes us to feel like, oh, my God, maybe something's really important is happening on my phone this second, as opposed to when we didn't have phones at all. We just figured out how to live our lives without that. But my point is that a lot of times we don't know what we're feeling, and yet feelings are impacting us all the time. So that's a great thought that you shared. I'm glad you shared that. Mm-hmm. One of the other things you talked to me about was some kind of butterfly metaphor, and you want to say a little bit more about that?
That also came out of one of the last, it might have been the last session with one of the groups, and we were asking the different participants how they felt about the I think it was like a 10-week or 8-week stint where we did all of these sessions. And one of our facility managers quoted a scene from A Bug's Life, if you're familiar with children's movies.
Oh yeah, I've seen A Bug's Life. Uh-huh.
And about the beautiful butterfly. And so he described going through the sessions as kind of like that metamorphosis for a butterfly. Wow. I think it was a caterpillar that made the comment, and then turned into a butterfly. And so he was kind of joking around and kidding, but it's a bit of a profound statement if you think about really how he was describing his experience with the sessions and learning about the emotion roadmap and learning these different exercises that we had given my staff to try to work on for themselves. But the goal was then to be able to turn around and teach and train some of this with their direct reports. And so one of the girls that was in the group with him when he said that, she actually printed that caterpillar out. She's got it on the back of her computer screen. And again, it's something that you chuckle at, you smile at it when you see it. But there's some real meaning behind it if you take a moment to think about, how he was describing that experience. And so for me, again, going back to, we're trucking and warehousing, and that's often a field where that's not something you think about, hey, we're going to sit down and talk about feelings today. And to, have one of our facility supervisors have that be his takeaway from it, I felt was validating for you and I setting up these groups, but also a win for the whole group, because if I've got supervisors that are now really thinking about these things, not only for themselves, right, how their emotions are showing up, but also understanding that their staff and their counterparts are showing up with emotions that might be affecting, how they're walking into work too, and how they might be able to recognize that in others to again, be able to influence how a situation might go. So we're not, fanning fire of a heated emotion when we don't need to be, if that's not a helpful situation for the conversation that we're trying to have.
Well, that's great. And one way of thinking about that is, the butterfly is beautiful, and the caterpillar is not necessarily a beautiful bug to look at necessarily, but also I think you can think of it in the sense that the caterpillar is just crawling along, moving pretty slowly, and a butterfly gets to soar. And I hope that that's the experience of the organization. That there is a soaring sense with it, because again, it looks like the group's having a lot of fun. I know you have days where somebody has an accident or some insurance claim, or I mean, there's all kinds of things that can happen that cause a day to be a tough day. But it seems like people pulling together. I know one of the things I asked you about is, can you point to a metric of any kind? And we talked about this idea of retention. I think you said from the time we did this was a couple of years ago now. I think you said only one person has left, if I remember right.
Yeah, so the two groups that we had go through, if I remember right, was it 14 people? 13 people go through.
Yep.
We've had one person leave since the conclusion of those courses. And I go back to, I think as a leader, it has to be authentic. We talked about this with my team too, right? If this is not something that you even remotely care about, and you try to walk in and have these types of conversations with your direct reports or your management teams, if you're a higher level leader, they're going to see right through it, and they're going to recognize that you don't really care, and it's not going to work. It will fall flat for you if there isn't, a genuine, authentic desire to understand, where your team is at. And for me, I know there are leaders that maybe fall into that category, but it's really hard for me to imagine a scenario in which I am not thinking about my teams, or I'm not caring about how my team is feeling about certain events or how they're showing up for work. I think because they recognize, I was sitting in these sessions with these two groups too. So they got to hear some of the same things that I was struggling with or that I was working through, just like I got to hear what they were working through or how they were using these tools. And I think that was something that helped them not necessarily humanize it, but bring it all together and see, okay, yeah, this is a tool that works inside of the walls of our business, but this is also a tool that works outside of the walls of this business. And I think as leaders and as organizations, if we can be giving tools to our team members that not only help move them forward, while they're on the clock and while they're within the walls of your organization, but also as they're out in the community, as they're, doing work within the community or with their families or teaching their children and all of those things. I think if we're giving them tools to use outside of our walls, that is what I believe will drive engagement and retention and all of those things, because they feel heard, they feel seen, they are actually being heard. And I think that helps drive that just desire to do a good job. That's where you see those Gallup polls showing, highly engaged and that moderate to high engaged employee is, they want to do a good job, not only for themselves, but because we're able to have some of these discussions together as a group, they want to do a good job, and they want to be successful for their counterparts, their peers, their direct reports, their customers. They want to do a good job for their families. They sometimes want to do a good job for me when it's, in relation to my team. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing for me that I've seen is, as we continue to have some of these dialogues, I mean, it's not the same as sitting down for an hour every week with each of these groups. But that language is there now. So I can have a conversation with somebody, whether it's out on the warehouse floor or in a break room, or even if they come up to my office, right? And because that language has already been established within these groups, we're able to talk through these things, maybe not in an hour, but maybe have a 15-minute conversation. And then, like you said, sometimes when it's a more difficult conversation, you do take a little bit more time to really intentionally talk through something to make sure that the people that are involved are feeling the way, that we want them feeling before, during, and after our conversation.
Oh, that's great, Tamara. Yeah, I had a couple of examples I wanted to give before we run out of time about things that have happened over the time we've been together. One, I remember when we were first looking at this idea of sometimes personalities, sometimes systems, sometimes structure, sometimes strategy. There's different reasons why certain problems exist. And I remember one of the distinct things that happened when we first started working together was I remember a customer received two different invoices from two different parts of your companies, and they paid one bill because they just paid it to one that they did the most business with. And then people were kind of upset with each other because why did they pay you and not us? And anyway, but we stepped back and we said, wait a minute, how do we want the customer to feel? And how are we feeling? And how do we want each other to feel? And then, when we asked those questions, everybody said, you know what? I think what we need to do is just have one invoice come from the company, and then internally we'll figure out where the dollars go. And that makes it easier for everybody, and nobody needs to be mad at each other. And when you said before, when we were talking about shared values versus shared feelings, I just want to bring up the way I think about that is how important it is, as you mentioned earlier, that, if we say respect's a shared value, great. But if we say, are you respectful? And do you feel respected as a member of this team? That's much more compelling to me and much more powerful. And I think that's sort of what was going on there, the way I think about it. You also told me about a person, I don't know if she's the one who left later, but there was somebody that was thinking about leaving, that her husband wanted her to leave. It was a woman that worked with you, an important job. You really liked her and hoped that she'd stay, but she said, I'm going to give you notice, and she did. And then after a while, when she didn't come in and tell you what day she was leaving, she eventually came and said to you, you know what, I love this place. I don't want to leave. I was going to, I thought I needed to, but I'm really enjoying being here. And she chose to stay, at least at that moment. And then one other one I thought was really special. Oh, good. Okay. And then another one that we worked on together was, how do we want the community to feel about you? And I remember we got one of the people that isn't there now, but was there at the time, to get a TV station to record your folks delivering pallets of food and water. I think it was to a shelter of some kind, and it got filmed on the local news in Omaha, and people kept hearing about it from the neighbors that, hey, that's your company, isn't it? And I think that we then started we started looking at how do we put people together who might want to know each other better, that don't necessarily work together from the different companies. Because you only have around 100 employees or so. And everybody's in different parts of the organization. They may see each other, but if we send them out to Habitat for Humanity or just something where we do something collaboratively, let's think about who we send out together so they get to know one another. And I think that had some benefits too. So those are some of the examples that I thought were really kind of resonated with me as I saw your team doing what you've been talking about all along. And then you told me yourself, just when you talk to customers, you had a customer upset with something, and as you're listening to him, you're thinking, how is he feeling and how do I want him to feel?
Mm-hmm.
And so
like I said, this is something I use multiple times a day.
Okay, so I guess as we're thinking about closing this, are there things that you would think for anybody that might be thinking about doing more with emotional intelligence and wanting to incorporate some of these lessons? What would you say to them? Because I know when we first started talking, even though you had this internal need to want to help people to grow, there was a hesitation. Can I really bring this into my organization? What are people going to think? What are people going to say? Does this really make any sense? Right?
Absolutely. Those were all conversations I had with myself, and I voiced several of those with you as we started down this path. And I would say kind of how I started it in the beginning. I think this is a very overlooked topic when it comes to certain industries and when you're looking at different levels of leadership. But I think it's so important. I think that this is like we've talked about earlier, people have emotions, and people that work for you are going to show up with those emotions. And if you are able to learn about tools to help you understand how those different emotions can allow you to be successful, be efficient, hold your teams accountable, all of those things. I think that just makes your organization that much stronger and that much better. And so for me, I'm a huge proponent of this. Yes, in the beginning, we kind of went, oh, how are we going to make this work? But I think we did a good job of introducing the tools and the ideas to my team to really, like I said, be able to create an environment where everyone has the same vocabulary now to be able to talk about these things.
That's great. We had talked a little bit about how do you sustain it and how do you keep it going. And I had mentioned to you that one of the things that I've been working on is trying to create this online program that people can take. And that one of the things that I discovered when a lot of people have developed online courses. And I know myself, sometimes if I'm just taking a course on my own, once I've paid for it, I'm kind of dedicated to getting it done and doing it and finishing it. And then I can get distracted, and I can find myself all of a sudden filled with all kinds of messages, voicemail messages, emails in my inbox, and I'm taken away from it. And darn, it's hard to get back to it. Sometimes I do, and other times I don't. But I think one of the things that I've found is that if we can bring people together, just like the groups that we had, really, where people feel like accountable, because I know I'm going to come in and talk to somebody. And maybe if it's onboarding and it's a small number of people that you're just trying to bring on that are new to the company, that you have a mentor. You create sort of a mentoring program where somebody takes them through, whether it's this course or some other course, where you're teaching the skill set or you create your own, but somehow, some way, so that people who have gone through all this with you don't feel as though they start to lose it as more and more new people come on board. How do you get everybody that's new to embrace what you've already gone through yourself that feels so good to everybody?
Right. I mean, those were definitely conversations that you and I had. At this point, I don't have a great answer for it, but you brought up this idea of this online course that you started creating, and that's probably some form of that is probably going to be what the answer is. I was explaining to you, obviously the goal is for growth and scalability. And, it's right now I'm small enough where I can have one-on-one conversations with each of the staff members. If I have exponential growth within my businesses, it's going to be harder for me to be able to sit in front of each new hire. But if there's a way for us to capture, those lessons and those tools and be able to teach it in a way that's like an online course or a move at your own pace thing, I think that's probably going to be the direction that is going to be the best for us and probably a lot of companies moving forward.
Well, we've kind of hit the end of the line here, Tamara, for this show. So I want to thank you for all that you've shared and all the contributions that you and I have made together over the last several years. And I think it's been great. And I just want to leave people with this image because I know that you're on the phone now, but you can see this when you look at it later. This is a picture that AI created of Tamara in a rearview mirror for a truck driver as he's looking back and, okay, I guess somebody's supporting me back there, so I guess I'm okay. Anyway, I know it must feel great for everybody to have you as a leader, and I'm very thankful that you and I have had the chance to work together over these several years. And thanks for being my guest today.
Absolutely, I appreciate you spending time with me today and over the last several years. This is a wonderful relationship, and I enjoyed the conversation today.
Thanks a lot, Tamara. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye now.
For over 40 years, SCM has been the voice of our town,
bringing us together through local programming,
education,
and live broadcasts.
SCM isn't just about television.
It's about empowering our community,
ensuring our voices are heard during government meetings,
and celebrating milestones
like our high school graduations.
But today, SCM faces a challenge.
Our funding structure is based on television subscriptions.
And it's no secret, people have been cutting the cord.
With a shift to internet-only subscriptions,
SCM receives less revenue,
even though all our programming is freely available online.
We need your support.
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 Your donation can make a difference.
It will ensure that SCM remains open,
continues to educate our youth,
and keeps our community informed.
Thanks to SCM, I've been honing my creative skills, helping me work towards my college degree.
SCM is crucial for keeping our community connected.
SCM isn't just here to broadcast local events. They're actually preserving Simsbury's history.
Join us.
Join us in preserving Simsbury's voice.
Simsbury's voice.